From the University of Nebraska at Omaha, this is NCITE Insights. I'm your host, Erin Grace. Well, welcome to NCITE Insights. I'm super excited today to introduce everyone to our guest, Dr. Jenni Hesterman. She is a current NCITE researcher, retired Air Force colonel, astronaut-in-training, one of the many titles and accolades. Since 2007, I guess, Jenni, you've served as a security services consultant for public and private sector, investigating transnational terror and crime threats and providing risk assessment. So today we are going to discuss supply chain and your future in space. But before we get to that, I want you to tell us about the current work you're doing with Joel on the HRA team. And
Sure. So I just came from a great meeting with Joel and his students, and they're working on a tool for K-12 schools to help them assess their vulnerabilities and risk when it comes to security. And I'm with ASIS, and we just wrote the first school security standard for our country, and it's taken us a couple years, and it's about to roll out. It went out for public review, and we mitigated, I think, about 3,000 comments from the public. And so his project is very closely aligned to what we're doing in the other side of the house, and I think, again, it shows like the public-private academia partnership on security that's really interesting. With this tool, we just discussed how to roll it out to the schools because it could be overwhelming. What we found with the standard is that the schools are already a little bit stressed out about security.
Right.
We started using the word safety a little bit more than security. We're finding that resonates a little bit better. And also just how we deliver products to schools. So it's not overwhelming. It's in their language. We respect their culture. We understand where they're coming from when it comes to security. So we talked about that with the team and the instrument that they're working on. Where it should reside. Should it be on the internet? Should it be downloadable? We need to protect that data because anytime you do a vulnerability or risk assessment, that product, it has the keys to the kingdom for a threat actor. If somebody gets a hold of that, they know all your vulnerabilities, and we have to think about insider threat. So these tools have to be protected. So we talked about that as well. So I'm very excited about the work that they're doing for schools. One of the issues with soft target venues that I found through the years is that they're all different. So if you think about schools, you have a small school in a rural area compared to like a large private K-12 outside of a major metropolitan area, which I did an assessment on one of those a couple years ago. They have a huge budget. They had license plate readers. It was at this high end of security, whereas some of the rural schools, like the locks are broken on the doors, and we need to fix that. So having one tool apply to multiple types of facilities has been a real challenge in the soft target world. So they're on a great track to help schools, and it's just exciting to hear what they're up to, and also the students. As some of them are recent high school graduates, and they're living through this era of being fearful, going to school every day. So it's important to have them on the team and their perspective as well.
Well, we're glad to have you here for that. I mean, it's interesting timing. My 15-year-old just went through a lockdown at her school. And I can tell you that 10 years ago, when this was happening, I was shocked. Like, oh, I can't believe they have to do this, and this is sad, and all that. And I'm so used to it now. And I'm wondering if school communities are more used to that whole idea of safety.
I think they are. We don't want to get complacent, though. Complacency is a big challenge with security. We find a lot of times that leads to vulnerability that allows other things to happen, maybe not a school shooting, but like assaults, things like that. We can't get complacent. And it's kind of like when you're at the mall and the fire alarm goes off, nobody moves, right? Or at the airport.
Oh, right.
When there's some kind of an alarm, everyone just stay at the gate. Recently, I think I was at the Kansas City airport, there was a tornado that was close to the field.
Oh, yeah.
And the tornado alert went off in the airport, and they said, go to the shelters. And everyone was at the windows taking pictures of the tornado. I think people just get complacent, like, oh, it's not going to hit here. We're in an airport. Or just they're feeling too comfortable. So, there's a fine line in the security world. We have to be careful, security theater, where we're overdoing it. We become like Chicken Little, where the sky's falling and there's all these threats and everything. We have to be just really deliberate about training, exercising, taking the fear out of things, being more practical, data-driven, and analytical about it as opposed to emotional. I've tried to do that with my work as well because a lot of these topics are emotional. And we're talking about kids. I mean, schools are completely different. When I do an assessment like at a data center or an airport, it's completely different than a school. we're dealing with children and teachers. And so
Yeah.
with security, we have to tailor our message, and our language and how we communicate.
To your point on the airport, I'm just wondering, are schools more responsive given the precious that what they have to protect?
I think so. I mean, I think the teachers feel a responsibility to protect vulnerable children, and it's really not part of their job to be security people. They're teachers.
Right.
So this is a difficult problem in schools because they now expect teachers to lock the door or lock down to do certain things in the classroom. It's really challenging. School security is very challenging overall. One of the trends that I'm seeing that I don't like is that the security technology companies are selling schools equipment and things that don't prevent the attack. I call it left of bang and right of bang.
Yeah.
So gunshot detection systems, that's after the attack starts.
Yeah.
The chalkboards that are also ballistic, that's after the attack starts.
Yeah.
Places to hide. There's things now in the classroom where you can create this thing that everybody goes into and hides. I don't know if you've seen that. There's a lot of technology. It's all after the attack. So some things are necessary after the attack, but trying to push those resources forward in the preventative, the behavioral assessment, the threat detection, the connecting the dots, also the physical security, not just locking the door, but the parking lot is part of your security, the neighborhood, the internet.
Right.
So those layers of defense. So I'm trying to really push schools and in other soft target locations to think preventative as opposed to responsive.
Yeah.
Because their resources are precious. So I want them to apply it in the best possible way.
Well, right. And that seems like a more palatable approach anyway. Well, switching gears, let's talk supply chain. You were here yesterday on behalf of Werner. It's a transportation and logistics company located here in Omaha in the College of Business. And so thank you for that. The supply chain, those were two words I had never in my life thought about until COVID. And we were out of toilet paper and storage shelves are going bare, which now happens in Omaha, Jenny, the night before a snowstorm. That everyone just runs to the grocery store like we're in the 1800s. And you do see those shortages. I mean, it prompts kind of a panic.
It does.
And so talk about the vulnerabilities of the supply chain and why a bad actor would want to attack those.
Well, COVID taught us a lot about humans.
Yeah.
With security, I always peel it back to humans. The hoarding that happened.
Yeah.
It's something, you'd think during a time when we're all fighting a common enemy, the virus, that the whole world would come together. And I used to think, what is the one thing that would happen in our world to bring us all together? And a pandemic is something I hoped, would be something we would rally around. But it turned out it's each person for themselves and each family. Which you can kind of understand. I mean, if you're trying to protect your family, but some of that hoarding instinct, it's important for us to know because if we have if we have a grid attack and a prolonged blackout, or we have some kind of, God forbid, a nuclear incident or something, how are people going to react? I think COVID shows us that model and we can prepare for it better. In terms of the supply chain, so what we learned during COVID was with medical supplies, not just the toilet paper, but the keeping people alive.
The N95s.
Right, running out of masks and then running out of ventilators. Remember the tubes, and they were using the adult tubes on children. And so we learned that the supply chain wasn't just to feed us and for creature comforts, but it's also to keep us alive. During yesterday's presentation, I showed the CISA graph with the 16 critical infrastructures of our country and how the supply chain affects every single one of them, from hospitals to communities to businesses. Everything is touched by the supply chain. And if one link is broken in that chain, I used the Maersk cyber attack example of how their whole shipping line shut down for 3 days and how that impacted the ripple effect of that. Really it's interesting because we learned it's the supply chain's linked to healthcare, it's linked to our national security. It is a target. There's so many nodes of it though. I yesterday unpeeled the onion, that you start with making the product all the way out to the delivery of the product, and along the way all those targets and places we need to protect, all the nodes in the supply chain. And it's almost an overwhelming challenge, I think, for companies to think about that and where do they even jump in and start, and that's why I peeled it back with some of the tools that they could use to first assess the target.
Right.
What is the target? Who are the threat actors who would target that? How do they operate? What are their tactics? Recent case studies. I love case studies. We learn so much from case studies. And then just trying to be more analytical and have a framework, right? It just helps people handle these almost mind-boggling, overwhelming security challenges.
Is there a case study that stands out to you, supply chain related?
I really think the COVID-19, the pandemic, I mean, it's just something that gave a lot of us food for thought. And I will say, in terms of terrorist groups and other actors, and even just mass shootings and violence that we saw during the pandemic, we saw how there's spillover between people not having their essentials and being afraid and not knowing when they're going to have things, how that impacts society as a whole. Because if you look at the data, mass shootings went up in 2020. When we came out of the lockdown, that summer was one of the most violent summers that we've had in our country. And I think in 7 years when I started tracking the data.
Interesting.
All the threat actors were online. We were all online during the pandemic, during the lockdown, and we were all afraid, reaching out, trying to get information, and they just fed off of that. They love chaos, and they love to recruit people who were scared to carry out certain activities. So we saw an increase in chatter, the groups, all the groups were out there trying to recruit people. And then we saw other things happen with, like, unfortunately, people who were in recovery from drug addiction. They weren't able to get to their groups. Well, unfortunately, the drug traffickers stepped into that void, and it was like Uber Eats almost, where people could call and have deliveries. And we had a lot of people relapse, and we saw the opioid crisis really start to take off in 2020. So again, these are like models that we can use now to apply to future potential challenges in our country and try to think about the supply chain and also the impact of when the supply chain is attacked or shuts down, human behavior. How do humans respond to that in communities?
I think everybody looked at COVID-19 as not great.
Absolutely.
How did we respond, and how did we make things worse? Hindsight being 2020, of course, looking back at, like, should we have shut down for so long, or what did those do? But I think about, Jenni, like the threat actors. So if the threat is a pandemic, like you said, it should theoretically pull us all together because the enemy is not human.
Right.
But and so in a way that blunts the fear factor that is involved when it's terror, a malign actor. You're scared of a person, a group.
Exactly. Yes. Right. And I think yesterday one of the questions was, how would a terrorist attack on the supply chain be different than like a disruption like we had in COVID-19?
That could be explained.
Exactly. Right. And I think if there is an attack, there has to be an investigation. And so everything would shut down, basically. Whereas with the pandemic, it was just slow in the ports and just slow to unload product and slow to get product to people. So I think in terms of a terrorist attack, it would actually derail us even worse in communities because it would be longer till we get things that we need. They know that. These groups are very sophisticated. Right. And one of the challenges I have with explaining to people about these groups is that they have big payrolls, first of all. They're very sophisticated. They're like multinational corporations now. I spent a whole year just studying the intersection of organized crime and terrorism at CSIS in D.C. As a colonel, as an Air Force colonel. The Air Force sent me there.
Wow.
It was great for a year.
I bet.
So it was wonderful. And as a colonel, you have to go to, well, you don't have to, but they'll send you to war college to learn how to plan wars. And I'd done enough of that, so I said I'd like to go to a think tank. If it counts as war college, will you send me? And they said yes. This is where I learned, like, ask and you may receive. So I spent the whole year looking at this, and I looked at these groups and found that they're very much like corporations, and it's hard to dismantle them. They do everything a corporation does. They have recruiting, they have a payroll, they do logistics. It's just exactly like a corporation. So they're very sophisticated, and they operate that way, and they're able to get in these spaces and just literally operate like a multinational corporation, which is really fascinating and scary at the same time because they're just, the staying power of these groups is unbelievable. I mean, Hezbollah and Hamas have been with us over 40 years. Al-Qaeda now I think is 23 years. ISIS is moving on that continuum where that's also going to be with us for a long time. You can't dismantle them once they get to a certain point. And the drug trafficking organizations are also like this as well, even the mafia. Some of these organizations have been around for 50 years.
It's interesting that you say that. I think the attack, the Gaza, the Hamas attack on Israel, and now it's almost 2 years ago, prompted this huge military response on Israel's part to remove these terrorist groups, Hamas, Hezbollah. their leaders have been killed, massive destruction, but those groups still exist.
Exactly. It's the ideology that binds these groups. It's the glue that holds all these groups together.
Yeah.
They could be leaderless organizations, but that again tracks with our corporations. You know, we have a lot of businesses that could be leaderless. I mean, I say like McDonald's, right? If you get a hamburger in LA and you get a hamburger in Paris, it's the same hamburger, right? They don't care who the CEO of McDonald's is. There's an ideology and there's a way to make it. There's a recipe. So these groups are leaderless. Excuse me, we do need to take the leadership out just because that's what we need to do. But we should never expect that the whole group is going to fall apart. I mean, we have the internet.
Right.
These groups, ISIS has cells all over the world. They don't need a leader of ISIS. They know what the ideology is and they carry out the attacks. They can go online and talk to each other clandestinely. They can raise money online. So I always say the ideology is the glue and like the internet is the place where it's all happening. And so you can't shut either one of those down. We haven't spent enough time actually working on ideology and how to try to dismantle that. In some ways it's easier to do a military operation than talk about people.
It makes complete sense to me. And if you were to flip the idea of supply chain on its head and apply it to a terrorist group or a drug cartel or any kind of other malign organization, how do you disrupt that the way a group might disrupt the supply chain? So how do you really break that up? And is the answer their staying power? I mean, is it just so much harder? It's easier to stop a toilet paper shipment than it is to stamp out an ideology? I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. Ideology is really difficult. And so after I retired from the military for 5 years, I worked in that space. One of my masters is in applied behavioral science. And so I love propensities, motivations, how people radicalize, de-radicalization, all those topics. So I spent about 5 years working in that space. And for instance, the call to jihad is very powerful.
Yeah.
The way they appeal to people through YouTube videos, targeting youth with certain music and visuals. It's very powerful. It's almost hypnotic when you're watching it. And you can see how they tailor their recruiting to the population that they're working with. They're very sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
But the ideology, what we find is that once people adhere to this ideology, it's almost impossible to turn them around. Okay. And if you look at any videos of like even just Timothy McVeigh, Dylan Roof, it's like they're activated and they just don't turn back. They know what they need to do and they carry out the attack and they have zero remorse. So what's interesting is when that actor gets to that point, all we can do is hardening. This is one of the reasons I shifted to hardening, because after doing that for 5 years, my husband was still in the Air Force, and he came home and said, I'm moving to the Middle East for 2 years. Would you like to come with me? And our daughter was a rising sophomore, and we said, yeah, let's go to the Middle East. So we moved to Qatar, over to Doha, Qatar, for 2 years. And then when I was sitting over there, I'm thinking about how I could harness what I know about protecting a military base. I understand the mind of a threat actor and the hardening in the Middle East that I saw. And how could I wrap my arms around that and bring it back to the U.S.? And so I wrote the book, the Soft Target Hardening book. And then when I came back in 2015, I went full-time into hardening. And I think because I understand these other perspectives, I see a property and a location through the eyes of a threat actor, and I'm able to help them find their vulnerabilities.
Give me a couple examples of success stories with clients or whomever that you've worked with in that realm.
Okay, sure. One megachurch that I did an assessment on, and it's interesting because they did have a lot of security, but it's so important to bring somebody external in because you get too close to it and you don't see the challenges. This church had a 2-story glass atrium, beautiful atrium. People came in from either side. There was a coffee shop, there was a kindergarten, like a bookstore, and they would hang out there for a couple hours and then go into the service, which was in a big auditorium. I think they had like 10 or 12,000 people at a service.
Yeah.
You could approach both glass and in this glass atrium, both entrances. You could drive a vehicle straight from the parking lot. They were not protected, these 2 doors. And they just had never thought about it. And so when I came to the property, I realized that, and I said, you realize anybody could drive right in here. And it doesn't have to be a malicious driver. We have a lot of distracted drivers, impaired drivers. You get sick and you hit the gas instead of the brake or whatever. You need to protect people from vehicles. So nobody wants a church to look like a prison when you go to church. So they designed this beautiful park around both of the entrances, and you don't even realize that's what they did. And I have the before and after pictures, and it's one of my big success stories is that they understood that.
Let me back up for just a second. How was it that a church came to be a client? Did they have some threat that they were trying to ward off, or did they just think like,
Their security director was at a conference where I spoke and came up to me afterward, and he's like, "Hey, if you ever come to the city, we would love to show you around." And I happened to be there for something. I called, and he said, "Just come by and walk through the property with me." And it wasn't even I just had coffee. I wasn't there like on a job. I just literally had coffee and walked around and helped point out some things. That's one success story. With schools, absolutely, like trying to help them. One of the major things is signage that people don't realize. We have so much signage in the U.S. Now that I say it, you're going to see it everywhere.
Okay, yeah.
In the Middle East, they don't use signs. When our daughter went to high school, there was the open house day. And I had an SUV, brand new SUV. I programmed in the GPS coordinates and everything, and we went to the open house. Well, I couldn't find the school. I was driving around, and finally asked somebody, "Where's the American School of Doha?" And he said, "That's it right there." And it was a concrete wall around the school. They didn't have a big sign that said American School of Doha and a big flag, and that was the school. And it got me thinking, like, in the U.S., how we just advertise everything.
Everything.
So on schools, I've started taking photos now. I use it in my presentations. This is the kindergarten. This is the nursery school. That signage is not necessary. If you're a parent, you know what building to go to. You've now just put a target on the most precious and vulnerable asset that you have on your campus. There's signs everywhere in hospitals, neonatal clinic this way. We have to be careful with signage on property. I think you're going to see it now that I mentioned. I see it everywhere.
That struck me when you talked about that yesterday, because I was suddenly thinking, I mean, we all know that it's TMI on the internet and we just overshare, but we are oversharing.
Yes, absolutely.
Location data, everything.
Absolutely. There was an attack planned, and it's interesting, and I think I mentioned it yesterday. When I ask people a lot of questions about security, and when I ask the average citizen, when was the last terrorist attack in our country, most of them will say 9/11. And when I say, do you realize what happened in New Orleans a couple of months ago was a terrorist attack, they don't understand that that's a terrorist attack. And it's interesting, we do, because we're in this realm, right? But all they know is that somebody drove into a crowd in New Orleans, and unfortunately some people died. But we don't really tell people this is ISIS. Like, ISIS is still alive and well and trying to recruit people in America. That message is not strong, right? It's not portrayed. But we had a threat actor from the UK who planned his entire attack online and then flew over here and went to Texas to this synagogue and attacked the synagogue and took a rabbi and I think 4 or 5 parishioners hostage. And 10 hours into this standoff, while the SWAT teams and everybody's trying to figure out what to do, the rabbi had run, hide, fight. And he goes, "Oh, it's time to fight." And he took the guy out and saved everybody. But that was completely planned online. And he targeted that specific synagogue in Texas and was able to go on websites. And I don't like to Monday morning quarterback any of this because, there's enough.
Yeah, sure.
People already feel bad enough, and I don't like to pile on with, why did you do that? Or why didn't you do this?
Right.
But churches, if you go on their websites, they say exactly like, "Oh, we have child Bible study in room 101 at 8 o'clock Sunday." Do you need to say that?
Right.
I just tell people, go to your website and scrub that. Do you really need to have all this information online? We're trying to be helpful to people, but we have to realize that these threat actors, they use all the same stuff we do.
Right.
They're online. They can get the access to the same information. So I've tried to walk people back about what they put out there to the public. I live in South Carolina, and when you drive through rural South Carolina, the churches still have like the little sign where they put the letters out every day. But they put some words out there that could trigger people. And I've even stopped and talked to people at these little churches and said, when people drive by and they see that message, you need to be careful. You may just trigger somebody. Just be careful with what you say. You don't have to say everything that you're feeling right now. Just have a little restraint. So just things like that. These are ways to harden that are really small.
Yeah.
And actually a lot of them are free.
Yeah.
Because people are resource constrained.
Yeah.
But I think, these small steps could lead to a hardened posture. Because when somebody sizes up a property and they're trying to decide whether to carry out an attack there, you want it to look so hard that they just say, "I'm not doing this.
Yes.
Not at this place." And they're going to move on. And you can't get up in your head about where they're going to, because I've had clients say that. Because I'll say, they're just going to go up the street. Well, I don't want them to go up the street. And you can't change the determined threat actor's mind. We can't turn them away. We can just take care of our property, right? If you're responsible for hardening a theater, you can't worry about the fact that they're going to go up the street to the church or some other place. it's difficult. It's a hard conversation.
I mean, honestly, your description of the Pulse nightclub shooter, and I think that had gotten lost in my own understanding of that event, but that shooter had tried to go to Disneyland or something?
His target was Disney. It was not Pulse. He never even knew about Pulse. And if you read the press reports, this was instructional as well, because they came out and said he'd visited Pulse before, or he targeted Pulse because it was a gay club. That's not it at all. His Disney Springs was his target. And it came out because his wife had to testify, and they took testimony from her, and it was, I think, 2 newspapers covered it only. I
mean, that just wasn't in my consciousness, that he moved on when he saw it was too hard.
Right.
And took a crime of opportunity, which, I mean, we all have. I live in an interesting neighborhood, and it's very safe. I feel great in it. And the couple times that we have had an issue, it was our own dumb fault. We left a garage door open.
Right.
I mean, and so even that shut garage deters people.
It does. It does, yeah. And I think with hardening, I also talk about neighborhoods. Let's say that you have a serial burglar, like a hardcore burglar who drives up a street, and you have ADT sign, Brink sign, and you have the house that doesn't have the sign. I mean, that's how it is with hardening. You have to think that you're always being watched, and that goes to cyber too.
Yeah.
You have to think that someone's always probing trying to get in. And so you don't want to be that weak link that they hit and they're able to get in, right? So you have to constantly think that you're being watched and probed, and kind of harden with that mentality.
I want to talk to you more about this, except I can't stop but think of your LinkedIn post from a couple weeks ago when you talked about being an astronaut. And Jenni, you had this long Air Force career, distinguished. You were in charge of Air Force One. Yes, you go off to the War College, you get master's degrees, you get your doctorate. You become this world famous expert in hardening soft targets, and now there's some other goal on the horizon. Tell me about this.
Yes, well, thank you for asking. I appreciate it. I always wanted to be an astronaut. So I remember when I was 3 years old and my parents woke me up from a nap to come sit in front of our black and white TV and watch man walk on the moon. I remember that. That's one of my earliest childhood memories. Yes, I was obsessed with space from that moment on. I had a little telescope, the little Fisher-Price telescope. I always had my eyes on the stars.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work out for me for a lot of different reasons. Yeah. And I did learn to fly when I was 16 and joined the Air Force and try to go down that path. And there was a lot of different reasons I won't get into. But I kind of gave up on the idea completely. And then a couple years ago, SpaceX, there's Jared Isaacman. He's bought 3 SpaceX missions. He's very wealthy. On the first one, he took one of the seats. It was to raise money for St. Jude's Hospital. And the second seat, he wanted to go to a former St. Jude's patient who'd recovered. And so a nurse, he gave a St. Jude nurse the seat. The third seat was a lottery. Every dollar you gave to St. Jude, your name went in a hat, basically, and they pulled a name out and you got the seat, and they pulled somebody out. And then the fourth seat, he owns an app, and he said, I want you to create a storefront with my app to sell space merchandise. And so I thought, what do I have to sell? I don't have anything. Well, the woman who received that seat, she created some poetry, she made some art, she set up a storefront, and she did a video, and she got the seat. And hardly anybody applied for that.
Oh, wow.
And so when I found out that I had a 1 in whatever it was, a small chance of that, I thought, I'm never going to pass an opportunity by again. I will be more creative next time.
Yeah.
But Dr. Sian Proctor went to space. And when they interviewed her, she said, I'm an analog astronaut. And I'm like, what's that?
Yeah.
So she said, I go on missions and I test spacesuits and food, and I go on these remote missions. And I thought, I want to do that. So I jumped right into the community. And I commanded a mission at the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah. And it was all-woman international crew. We went out there for 2 weeks and just did a lot of behavioral testing, group dynamics. We tested a therapeutic baby seal to take to space that would be like your pet in space. Just a lot of different things. So that's what I do. I go out on these missions, and I'm building my skill set, and hopefully maybe someday actually get to go to space as a commercial astronaut. So I haven't given up the dream. But I'm enjoying the journey. If it doesn't happen, all the younger analog astronauts that I mentor, I'm teaching them about crisis leadership, crisis communication. We do a lot of exercises in the field where like the power goes out at the habitat. An analog astronaut's hurt, and we need to get them back to the hab to the airlock. So trying to help them build the skill set. They're all going to go to space probably, and someday, they'll take a piece of me with them if I don't go.
Gosh, this is so aspirational. I love it. The astronauts who just returned from, I 1,000 questions about that. I don't know if that was one of your crises that you were just kind of gaming out how to bring them back safely, but that doesn't deter you from thinking of...
Oh, not at all. No, and my family completely supports this, which is kind of interesting. They know that I've talked about space my whole life, and they completely support me. But Sunny is my age. And so, seeing Sunny at the International Space Station and doing her EVA and going outside and doing her spacewalk. And, everybody said they're stranded in space. They loved it. It was Sunny and Butch's last mission to space. And I think they absolutely loved it. I'm sure they weren't prepared. They went for 7 days, not, this many months. But just seeing a woman that's my age do that, it actually put more wind in my sails that maybe this is a possibility. And I want to at least get the skill sets and the certifications and everything and make myself available in case I ever get the call. So I'm ready to go.
I have no doubt, Jenni, that you will. And if you do, you have to promise either come back to this show or we'll do it from space.
I'll take the NCITE coffee cup up with me.
Yes, something like that. Because honestly, I think what was so inspiring to me, I understand why you were inspired because you can see yourself there, but what was inspiring to this Earthling here was that they didn't lose their marbles. I use that for my kids. Like this, they went up here thinking this and it turned out to be that. And how did they not give up?
Exactly.
And stay in the game and not be too far afraid. And I guess maybe it brings it back to our original topic. What you're dealing with has a big fear factor to it.
Yes.
So much so that you can't say the word security with some clients, right?
That's right.
And so at the end of the day, how do you sleep at night knowing what you know and still dreaming of good things?
Well, when you know so much about things, it's hard sometimes to travel. And last year we did a cruise through the Panama Canal, which was fascinating. We pulled into a port. We went all the way down to Peru. One of the ports I know has problems with narco traffickers, and we pulled this cruise ship right into this port.
Hi guys.
So so I have to live my life, and I think all of us that work in security, we realize that if we don't travel, if we don't do, they win, right? They win. So I'm not going to let them win. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to be smart about it, but I'm going to get out there and I'm not going to be afraid. But I think there's resilience. And I know that word's thrown around a lot, but there's human resilience as well. And all of us have been through something in our life that was difficult, no matter what it was. I mean, it could even, one of my students, I teach grad school for Department of Defense, and one of my students just lost her dog during our semester. And I've gone through that, and it's devastating. So resilience, we all have something that's made us stronger and more determined. But just to seize the day, I think we don't want to be afraid. And yesterday I talked about living in these different zones, right? We need to be cognizant of the threat, but not be paranoid about it and not put ourselves in a corner where we think everyone's a threat, everything's a threat, we're always under attack, or we could be under attack. We can't live like that. That's no way to live. So I really try with people to explain to them the odds. I think I talked yesterday about what are the odds of me ever being in a mass shooting. I had somebody ask me that once, and I went back and did all the calculations. And like I said yesterday, your odds of being struck by lightning twice are it's more likely than being in a mass shooting or an active shooting event. And I think it brings it down to people, but it's triggering, right? It's kind of like I live at the beach, and people always ask, are there sharks? The tourists, when I go down to the beach, are there sharks? Are there sharks? Meanwhile, they're not wearing sunscreen. And I say, your odds are, you better get that sunscreen on, because your odds of a problem with that later is much, much higher than ever even seeing a shark. But shark, and so I think with active shooters, we were in the same thing. Like that's a triggering thing. And it has led to people being more interested in security. I will say.
It's a good thing.
And being more concerned and actually hardening things. So I have to say that's a good result. But we just don't want people to be fearful. You have to live your life and pursue your goals. And it's a marathon, not a sprint, so we have to pace ourselves. And that's one of the things I'm thankful for with the space journey, is when William Shatner went to space and he was like 93 or whatever, I thought I've got like 35 more years to get to space. I'm going to get there.
Well, I know you will. I have all the faith in the world.
Thank you.
Is there any last topic we left
Oh goodness, we've covered a lot. The recent designation of the drug cartels, I think is really interesting. I always talk to people about designation. What does that mean? Why do we have designation? And when a group is designated, that means that any Americans that help that group in any way, it could just be providing advice, it could be harboring them, doctors, lawyers, anything that you do for a member of this group, you can now be arrested and rolled up under the laws because you've now aided and abetted a terrorist group. And so it's really powerful to designate a group, because otherwise, if we don't, and you're aiding and abetting, there's really no law unless that person's prosecuted and they bring them in somehow on a similar or like a adjoining crime. So anyway, the power of designation is really important as we fight these groups. We actually tried to get the Los Zetas cartel designated years ago, I don't know, maybe a decade ago. That's a paramilitary cartel, and they had special tactics and knowledge. They were all former special forces that got out and formed a cartel. They were a big threat. They were also in Arizona. They were in Texas. They were in our country. And we tried to get them designated without success. And so I was happy to see us start to move toward designation. One thing that did worry me, though, is that when you do designate a group, they start to take on a little more
cachet.
Yes, because now they're designated just like Al-Qaeda's designated. And
so it weirdly elevates them?
Yeah, it does. It actually emboldens them a little bit. It's a twisted way to think about it.
Yeah, really.
In terms of recruiting and saying, hey, we're a legitimate group. Like we're on the books. They think we're really somebody. We have to be careful, I think, as well. But I think from a prosecutorial and deterrence factor, designating them is really important.
Okay,
so.
Good. Well, more to discuss on that front.
Yes.
So happy that you're in Omaha. Thank you so much for coming here. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And I really appreciate NCITE having me here, and just being with the students and the faculty is just a huge booster shot of energy for me. And we need that as security professionals.
Yes.
Because we are fighting an uphill battle out there, and sometimes you feel like you're not making any progress. And then when I come here and just see all the thinking and just all the energy that's being put towards these topics, it just keeps me going forward. It puts the wind in my sails. So it's great to be here.
Well,
thank you.
Doors open, welcome Matt is out, but we won't put any signs up. How
yes,
about
no
that?
signs. Okay, exactly. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Erin.
sounds good. This series is produced by Ben Badafarano, Erin Grace, Scott Jordan, and Blake Ersch. Thank you for joining us for another episode of NCITE Insights. The National Counterterrorism, Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, or NCITE, is an academic center of excellence for the Department of Homeland Security. Looking to find out more? Check out our website at ncite.unomaha.edu or email us at ncite@unomaha.edu.